Good evening and welcome to the Planning Commission meeting of Tuesday, November 12th, 2024. I now call the meeting to order, and if we'd all stand, we'll say the Pledge of Allegiance together, please. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you, everyone. Anna, voice roll call, please.
Chair Eric.
Present.
Vice Chair Toller.
Here.
Commissioner Rojas.
Present.
Commissioner Zick is absent. Commissioner Andrade.
Here.
Commissioner Klepak is absent. Commissioner Martinez.
Here.
That's everyone. Okay, thank you. All right, thanks, Anna. This brings us to announcements and presentations. We have one presentation item tonight to kick us off, starting with the housing element implementation update. So staff, I'll go ahead and kick it over to you to make that presentation.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Planning Commissioners. My name is Anna McGill. I'm the city's Advanced Planning Manager. And tonight I'm going to provide an update on the housing element implementation. This update was provided to the City Council on October 15th, and because the Planning Commission reviews and approves and considers items that are associated with the housing element, staff thought it would be a good idea to bring the presentation here tonight as well. So if you were in attendance on that night or you listened to that, it's going to be a little bit of the same information, but hopefully we'll have a chance to answer questions and have discussion too. So here's the roadmap for the presentation tonight. First, I'm going to go through the Regional Housing Needs Assessment progress, which I'll refer to as RHNA for the rest of the presentation, and then walk through pipeline projects. Then I'll go take you through a status update of the housing element programs. There was an update provided to the City Council in December 2023, so I'm really going to try to focus on updates that have happened since that time. I'll talk about the housing programs that are completed, underway. I'll talk about the city's rezone program, which is going to be the bulk of sort of the new framework work that we're going to undertake next year, and the RFP that has recently been released for that work, walk through the milestone schedules, and then talk about next steps. So a little bit of background to start us off. The city adopted its housing element in November 2022, and that included a housing plan. That housing plan identifies specific actions or programs which achieve the goals that are on the slide before you. Our housing element lists 47 different programs to be completed within our 2021 to 2029 planning period. And the majority of those have deadlines that are front-loaded to the beginning of the planning period. I'm going to walk through pipeline projects. Pipeline projects, for the purpose of this presentation, means projects that are under entitlement review, have been entitled, have already gotten a building permit, are under construction or recently constructed. And the goal is really to start assessing the city's housing production during the housing element period. And just as a quick reminder, projects that obtain a building permit can count towards our RHNA, but we like to analyze our pipeline projects because once they're in entitlement review or further in the process, we feel fairly confident that they will eventually count towards our RHNA, so we start tracking them at that point. So the first graph table that's on the slide for you is the small scale projects. These are staff level type permits, single family homes, ADUs, duplexes, triplexes, and for 2021, October 2021 to 2023, that totals 414 new units, consisted of 261 projects. That number is probably higher because I don't have 2024 included. We're getting close to the end of the year, so the next time that an update is provided, we'll have those numbers too. I should just quickly mention these are taken from our annual reporting on our general plan and our housing element. And then we also have larger housing projects in the pipeline. Currently, we have a total of 14 projects that we consider in the pipeline, and they equate to 2,646 projects, housing units. And then finally, as you're probably aware, the Fairview Development Center specific plan is underway, and the housing element identifies 2,300 units for that site. City staff presented 3 different land use concepts in the summer throughout a series of outreach events. And those 3 land use concepts ranged anywhere from 2,300 units to 4,000. So that's what you're seeing here, the breakdown of the incomes and that range of numbers. So now if we put all of those graphs together, this is really how we started tracking our progress against our arena allocation. So a total of 3,060 units is in the pipeline, and that consists of about 26% of our total arena allocation. As you can see, though, we obviously have income categories that we need to meet. So in some of those categories, we're doing a better job than others. That's not totally unusual for jurisdictions in California. It's typically more difficult to encourage and find opportunities for housing productions at those lower income categories. And then under that total bar, you'll see if we include FDC, we're then anywhere from 5,360 to 7,060 units, and that's about 46 to 60% of our total arena allocation. So moving on to our housing programs that are completed or underway, and I'm going to try to really focus the updates on what has occurred since December 2023. The first is monitoring and preservation of at-risk housing units. So within this planning period, the city identified 75 very low income units at 1844 Park Avenue, also known as the Costa Mesa apartments, that were identified as at risk. City staff reached out to the property management company, and they confirmed that they hold an agreement with HUD, and that agreement renews every 5 years. So that means that that agreement mandates the affordability covenant, and that building will continue to be affordable housing under a covenant. And so for the purposes of our planning program, we consider those units to not be at risk and that program to be complete. Another program that has been recently completed is the Affordable Housing Ordinance. The City Council held its second reading in August, and that ordinance became effective in September. So that program is complete, but in the background, staff are still developing housing agreement templates and forms and information to go on our website to help our applicants and residents really understand what those requirements could be on future housing projects. I talked about the Fairview Development Center a little bit, but those survey results from all the outreach events conducted in the summer have been posted on our website, and I'll talk about it a little bit at the end of the presentation, but the next steps would be to come to the Planning Commission for a study session on the land use concepts, the survey results, and financial feasibility analysis that's still being conducted. For accessory dwelling units, the city is putting together a pre-approved ADU program, and that is in line with state law to develop a process where designers and architects can submit and be on the city's pre-approved list. Then residents could come into City Hall, they could pick one of the pre-approved ADU plans, and they could get a more expedited review process where they'd only need to submit like a site plan, potentially a soils report. We are also updating our ADU ordinance in line with recent state legislation prior to the end of the year. And then finally, the city is participating in the regional assessment of fair housing in accordance with HUD guidelines for 2025-2029, along with 33 other jurisdictions that are participating. The final product of that is a report that has recommendations city by city. So the city will adopt those, incorporate those recommendations into our 5-year consolidation plan, along with outreach that occurred in October of this year. All right, moving on to housing programs that are associated with projects. The Bridge Homeless Shelter increased its total capacity to 100 beds and launched the Street Medicine Program in August. So that provides primary and behavioral health care to those that are sheltered and unsheltered. The bungalow project is now complete, which included remodeling 6 existing units and constructing 2 additional ADUs, and those units are also now occupied. The Travelodge project at 1400 Bristol proposed converting the existing Travelodge into 76 deed-restricted units and 2 manager units. Funding is fully secured for that project, and construction will start in the new year. 2022-74 Newport is another home key project. Phase 1, which included 40 units, was constructed in 2023. And Phase 2 for the remaining 48 units to permanent supportive housing with wraparound services, construction will begin at the end of the year, and funding has been secured for that. And then finally, the Jamboree Senior Housing Project went to the City Council in February for an urban master screening, and it increased its units since that time from 60 to 70 units, which includes 69 senior affordable units and 1 manager's unit. And it's currently in the entitlement review process. So now I'm going to move into really going through our frameworks for implementing the housing element. And in December of 2023, when we presented to the council, we broke this up into existing framework and new framework. So I'm going to follow that same framework for presenting tonight. The existing framework really focuses on building upon our existing programs, and that includes things like residential assistance, housing outreach. This is really about like information distribution. So the city is working on revamping our website to have like a housing focused landing page, and then going to our programs and different housing efforts from there. Zoning code updates, and these are different than the rezone program I'm going to talk about. These are more like code updates to update definitions, uses that are by right, including opportunities for residential uses in certain areas. And so some of those will be incorporated into this year's code cleanup, which will come before the Planning Commission at some point next year. And then finally, review of housing fees. And you'll see in a few minutes that that's going to really carry on throughout the housing element implementation period. Really, the goal of this program is to reduce the burden to housing projects, the fee burden. We will likely continue to review those fees after the rezone program when we have updated housing project types and consider to review if our fees are still appropriate for those projects. In terms of the new framework, I'm going to break that down a little bit more. Some of that includes visioning and community engagement that will be mostly on our objective design standards, and objective design standards really are what they say they are. They're objective. They're measurable, they're quantifiable. Height is a really good example of an objective design standard, so we will incorporate objective design standards citywide. And then the general plan and rezoning is really about simplifying and integrating and rezoning to build more housing opportunities. That includes reviewing our existing specific plans and updating them, updating or potentially replacing outdated urban plans, reviewing our housing overlays, reviewing our corridor plans, potentially introducing mixed zoning districts. And then finally, we have some programs that speak to our safety element update and environmental justice policies, and those are going to run concurrently with the climate action and adaptation plan that the council approved the contract for in October this year. So as I kind of briefly mentioned before, the city released the request for proposal, the RFP, for the rezone program. Those proposals are due on November 19th. And really what the city staff wanted to identify in the RFP was 2 main goals. One, that we do a process that's as expeditious as possible to get us to HCD certification, and 2, a program that's really comprehensive, that really sets us up for accelerating housing production, and dare I say, potentially future RENA cycles. So we want to be thinking about those things, and some of that might include consultants bringing to the table creative ideas or possibly different approaches. Okay, moving on to the milestone schedule, I'll just point out a couple of things here. So the darker blue is really identifying the programs that are active, that have work associated with them, and milestones. And then in the light blue, you'll see programs that will kind of continue to live on throughout the planning period. So we're going to continue to provide, rehabilitation programs and support services. We're going to continue to update our webpage throughout the planning period, identify housing partnerships, identify user-friendly guides to implement all of these programs. And really the big bulk of the work that's new as part of the new framework is here on the second slide. And so you can see here, for the rezone program, which includes the general plan amendments, the rezoning of corridors and urban plans, that has some identified milestones with it and an identified timeline. So just to wrap up in terms of next steps, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier for the Fairview Development Center specific plan, staff intends bringing it back to the Planning Commission for a study session, and then coming back again to the Planning Commission for a recommendation on a preferred plan, and then final direction from council on that preferred plan. The rezone program, we hope to get good proposals on the 19th, and then we'll review them and score them and potentially hold interviews with the goal of getting a contract to the City Council for consideration and hopefully approval in early 2025, and then kicking off that program shortly after. And then finally, we'll continue to assess our housing element programs, update the City Council, update the Planning Commission and the public on our implementation progress as we go. And that concludes the presentation, and I'm here to answer any questions you might have.
All right, thank you, Ms. McGill. I appreciate the presentation. It's very thorough. Thank you. Colleagues, I think I'll go ahead and kick us off just because I have a few questions written down, but I'm curious to know your thoughts. If we can turn to slide 5, the pipeline housing projects. And we'll go sequentially after this. Just wanted to confirm that in the above moderate income column, as you go down the column towards the 19th Street Jamboree Senior Housing Project and the Bristol Street Home Key Phase 2, that those single digit units are those manager units?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, I don't know if that assumes that they're gonna be paid above moderate income, which would warrant setting those aside as above moderate income units?
It assumes that they're not deed restricted.
Okay, gotcha.
So we don't know what the potential rent could be or the potential income of those working there, but they won't be deed restricted.
Okay, thank you, Ms. McGill. If we go on to the next slide, 6, for pipeline projects for Fairview Developmental Center, an overall question, do we know what the % ownership distribution is given these different categories or different conceptual categories?
No, not yet. And the hope would be that, when we come back for a study session, the Planning Commission could weigh in on their thoughts and recommendations on that. Ultimately, a master developer is going to be chosen by the state to submit to the city. So our ability to kind of control what that spread of rental versus for sale will be is really more about trying to incentivize.
Okay, perfect, thank you. If we can go to slide 11, rezone programs, EIR. It's the second to last bullet point. Evaluate potential opportunities for residential and airport industrial areas. Do we know where we are right now with that assessment?
Yeah, that's a specific program in the housing element, and we haven't started to look at those opportunities because we anticipate incorporating that into the rezone program, more really just because of staffing and capacity and trying to, for efficiency purposes, kind of bundle things together.
Okay, all right, thank you. Next slide, 12. If we look in column 2025 Q1, and then you go down to the row review planning application fees at the bottom, I see that we have a forthcoming reassessment for planning application fees at the beginning of the year. I just wanted to get a general sense of how this is calculated when we do come to that point.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and we've really tried to start thinking about that internally. The reason that program is in there is to reduce any financial burden to housing projects. So, for example, one of the things that HCD pointed out is we have a state density bonus law fee, and try to review that fee and see if that's maybe a burden to submitting a project. Different cities assess fees in different ways, and what typically happens is the more larger projects that you have and the more complex they are, typically you tend to start reassessing the fees and the hours that go into that. So you'll kind of see this program carry on throughout the planning period. We'll do sort of a next year of what's on the books right now that's potentially, impacting housing projects from moving forward or could be a burden. And then after we finish the rezone program, what are those types of projects that are going to be submitted, and how do we really quantify the amount of staffing and time that's needed on those projects moving forward?
Gotcha. Thank you, Ms. McGill. And I'll say that for me, this is an academic interest. I think that decisions like these, like the fee schedule, is something that's mediated through city council, but I am always interested in the methodology behind it whenever that comes up. If we go to slide 14, last row, looking at the climate action adaptation plan, when exactly is this happening? And I think the comment that goes along with that question is I think a lot of people have been waiting for this to move forward, and it appears to have stalled out. I suspect, given the work that I do in climate adaptation planning, that once some of these policies come online, then it starts to affect the types of decisions that we would make up here. So I think any indication of what might be coming out in the climate adaptation plan, or when it'll be coming out, more importantly, would be really helpful for us up here. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the City Council approved the contract in October, on October 15th. We are holding a kickoff meeting next week with our consultant, and we're going to start outreach in the new year. So that program, or the entire scope of work, is anticipated to be about a 2-year program. So hopefully July 2026 is when we have a completed climate action and adaptation plan.
Wow, that's a long time. Okay.
There's a lot of work to be done.
Oh, I know, I've done it. All right, I think I'm done with questions for now. Gang, do you have any questions? Vice Chair?
Let Commissioner Martinez go first. Okay. First, I'll just ask, are we taking public comments on this specifically? No? Okay. Interesting. So I'll just get started. I'm not as organized as the chair, unfortunately, so I'm just going to go wherever. So first, I'm just going to ask, I guess this is a good slide for it, like all these programs in the housing element and in the housing program, they have set deadlines, right? What happens if we don't meet them? Or really, like for 2G, which is the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan, that deadline was December 2023. So what happens now that we've missed deadlines?
That's a great question. And I will say the deadlines are incredibly ambitious. I think we knew that from the start. Many of them were revised and recommended by the state. So they were very ambitious in nature given the number of programs we have to implement. And most, I would say a lot of other California jurisdictions are kind of struggling with this too, the number of housing programs, the RENA allocation that they have to meet. So HCD continues to monitor 539 California jurisdictions. Of those, 431 cities have an adopted housing element. This is all online, so it's all public information. And 396 have found to be compliant. So this leaves 143 jurisdictions that don't have an adopted housing element or are not in compliance. So I can't verify this for certain, but there's probably a process for HCD, in how they coordinate and work with cities to get to that point. They have asked us for updates. We recently provided them an update in August of this year on certain programs. They did not follow up to date with needing any other additional information. So I can't say for certain exactly what that means, but that's sort of where we are at. We continue to coordinate with the state to make sure that we are successfully implementing our housing element. Obviously, the goal to be getting to certification as soon as possible. But in terms of what will happen, I think most jurisdictions are asking that question, and no one quite knows the answer to that. We might find out during this planning period, but until then, we're going to keep working towards meeting our goals and moving forward as best as possible.
Okay, that's fun. The uncertainty is always fun. What about the builder's remedy? I think we don't have a certified housing element. Are we subject to the builder's remedy right now?
Yeah, so we do not have a certified housing element, and a project could submit a builder's remedy project. That is something that could happen. We do not have any projects that have been submitted to date for builder's remedy, and I will look at our assistant city attorney if he wants to add any other information.
Before he does, I will say that our current status of the housing element with being in statutory compliance, I think, Scott, you probably can add a little bit more to it, but I've been told that it's kind of up in the air with regards to, and it hasn't been tested legally, with regards to a builder's remedy where and I'm only bringing this up because, Scott, you might not be aware that we're in that gray area where we have the HCD telling us that we're in statutory compliance. And so just with that said, Scott, go ahead.
Sure, I'm the new guy. I don't know how to use the microphone. So yes, there have been a lot of changes relating to builder's remedy. So what is builder's remedy? It's the basic idea that a developer can come to the city and propose a project that is not consistent with our zoning, but they get to say essentially, well, we're going to build our project anyway. And there are limits on that, and there's been a whole spate of new legislation relating to this that will be amended somewhat, but in this most recent legislative cycle, the state adopted some new statutes that try to plug some of those holes. They talk about essentially if you do not have a housing element that HCD itself certified, then that doesn't qualify. That's what the legislation says. So that's potentially problematic. And there are certainly a number of negative consequences depending on how you interpret that, whether what I said is entirely correct or mostly correct or only somewhat correct. But there are certainly a number of consequences for sure.
Okay. More uncertainty. Good. This is good. All right. Just going to move past that because, apparently it's uncertain. Slide 10. There was the zoning code updates. So I think you mentioned housing possibly being moved into a by right use. So what are the like minor things that are being talked about in here that aren't like the major rezoning program?
Yeah, let me pull up my notes just really quickly too, so I can kind of give you the examples. You know, one of them that was proposed by HCD is allowing by right farm worker housing to the extent that we would get projects like that.
Yeah.
In Costa Mesa, I don't know, but that's something that it's one of our programs. Looking at opportunities, as you see on this slide, for in airport industrial areas, looking at our reasonable accommodation section of the code. So some of those programs will say like review and potentially update. So it's not exactly giving us a specific type of action plan, but it's encouraging us to look at it and ensure that it's still providing housing opportunities. Opportunities for housing on church sites. And so those are some of the examples of what those would include. We are conducting a code cleanup process. So what we're doing right now is trying to assess which of those could be considered more of a code cleanup and which actually kind of need a policy decision and would be part of something that we would just bring back to decision makers individually.
Okay. I realize this is a housing presentation, but I'm really only asking because probably every planning commission meeting I ask something that's kind of I give in my comments something that's kind of related to making things by right. Okay. For planning, reviewing planning application fees, which is program 2K, I saw on the public hearings for city council next week, they're looking at something with planning application fees. So can you explain like what's the difference between just what the ongoing, I think it's an annual review process, and what this one would do?
I'm not totally sure what's being brought to council next week, so I would have to look at that. But this is really more about looking at our existing fees and making sure that we're removing any potential burdens to housing projects. So making sure that they can get through our process efficiently. Now, with that being said, jurisdictions still have the ability to recoup the amount of time that is spent on those projects and the amount of resources. So I think after the rezone program, we're probably going to have to make a decision about our fees. You know, you can have a flat fee, you can have a cost recovery account that charges, you know, time by hour. So that's sort of a decision that the city will need to make, you know, as we get new types of housing projects and how we efficiently recoup our costs.
Okay. I think this might have been slide 4 or so on small scale pipeline projects. Yeah. So I checked the HCD APR forms. It looks like all of the units that are not above moderate income, so very low, low, and moderate, are all ADUs. So none of them are deed I was at the, I should disclose, I was at the council meeting where this was first presented. So I've heard this presentation, heard all the questions. So I wanted to get Councilmember Reynolds' question answered, which was about this. How many of these are deed restricted and how many are not? And none of them are. So I wanted to ask, how do we determine whether a specific ADU falls into any of these 3 columns?
That's a great question. And throughout the housing element and RENA cycle process, cities were continuing to work with HCD about how we deal with ADUs. I did at my prior jurisdiction. I don't think it's still entirely clear, and the state has kind of changed their interpretation a little bit as we've gone on in the process. But we have categorized these ADUs in this way because we have gotten a determination from HCD that they consider them to be affordable units for the purposes of reporting against our RENA. So I would have to get you more information on how exactly we came to the decision of where we categorize them. One of the options that we have talked about in future was maybe when you apply for an ADU, filling out a form like, do you intend to rent this? What would that rental rate be? So we can get more of a better understanding. You know, these are more like estimates, so we can get a better understanding of what that might be. But, you know, that can be tricky because we're kind of at the whim of the information that an applicant would want to share with us.
Yeah. Another ADU question. There's a state law requiring 60-day permit processing for ADUs. Are we there? Are we at 60 days? Are we
Yes,
more or
yeah.
less?
Yeah, typically we are doing it in less than 60 days. That's what state law requires.
Okay, great.
Just to add to that, Anna, maybe you might want to provide Commissioner Martinez a little bit more details about how we're making our ADU provisions a little bit more robust with providing pre-designed plans on the website.
Yeah, so thank you, Scott. There is a state legislation that speaks specifically to pre-approved ADUs. And so we need to set up a pre-approved program by the end of the year, which we're currently working on, that would allow architects and developers to submit plans, and we would review them. They would be on a pre-approved list. Then when a resident comes, if they want to pick a pre-approved plan, all they would need to do would be to pick the plan and then create a site plan so that we know exactly where that ADU is going, potentially a soils report depending on the location. Those ADUs are subject to a 30-day review. They're supposed to be a more expedited process. But because we already have it pre-approved and it's already been vetted by the city, that timeline is achievable.
Great. Okay. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Martinez. Vice Chair Toller.
All right, I think my questions will be easier. I'm sorry if there's some overlap. Slide 7. We go to slide 7. I assume these are all, well, the previous 2 slides, I guess, list out the number of units, and the question is whether those are all net. We're sure those are all,
They're
we
all
didn't tear down one house and build another and count it, right?
correct, they're
Okay.
net new.
And what has always been the explanation everywhere for what HCD is requiring is not that we build 11,000 units or whatever, but that we zone for it, right? But these are measuring what's in the pipeline to be built. And I assume that still counts. They still count. That's the big assumption behind these numbers, but
So I'm glad you brought
never
that
heard
up.
it said that way.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. I'm glad you brought that up because it's in my presentation. I forgot to say it. So our due diligence is to plan for the RENA allocation, not to make sure it's built. But this is, assessing our progress against that. Like, are our programs actually accelerating housing in Costa Mesa? And can we get an understanding of, what more work we have to do? In order to be counted towards RENA, which I think is your question, a building permit needs to be sought. So at the moment that a building permit is finalized, even before construction begins, that's when the state says we can count that towards our RENA. So clearly, if I did a new table here of how many of these projects have actually gotten a building permit, these numbers would look different. But we feel fairly confident once projects start going through the entitlement process, there's a pretty good chance that they will get a building permit. And as we get closer to the end of that planning period, it'll be easier for us to start to assess, like within the 2-year period to the end, okay, which of these projects actually reasonably could get a building permit before the end of 2029.
Yeah. I guess what I'm struggling with is the quota was the number of units that we need to plan for above and beyond our current capacity. But these fall under that current capacity if they didn't get rezoned, right? If it was like industrial land and it got rezoned as 50 DUA, okay, that's new. That went above and beyond what our current previous capacity was. But if it was an R3, and all along you could have built 50 units, but now they do, we get credit for that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, we will, if a project wasn't anticipated on our inventory sites or as part of our programs, our rezoning strategies, and it gets submitted and approved and it gets a building permit, it'll still be counted towards our RENA.
All right. Slide 10. And I just want to, so I'm focusing on the yellow part. Objective design standards, citywide and neighborhood based. So can you just give us a quick summary of what that entails? Like, is that going to be like supplementing the zoning standards we already have, or the creation of totally new zones for these corridors, or something in between?
Yeah, it could be a little bit of mixture of both, and we're still trying to work with whoever we choose as our consultant to figure out what that looks like. The objective design standards would be citywide, so whether you're part of the rezone, like a site in the rezone program in a Measure K site, or you're not, you'd still be subject to these objective design standards. The reason for objective design standards is because cities are losing their ability to review housing projects from a discretionary standpoint. So it needs to be very clear and objective. It'll be mostly focused on design, but your development standards will still live in your zoning ordinance. So the reason I say both is because, let's say one of our strategies is to introduce mixed zoning districts. Those will naturally have objective design standards too. They'll have height, they'll have setbacks, all of those things. So, we will have a document that is citywide that all housing projects would be subject to that are design-based.
In addition to the zoning standards.
In addition to the zoning standards, yeah.
I think most people would look at this and scoff a little bit at the 3-year timeline for rezoning sites. Here's the standards you want to build apartments. I'm wondering, the first two, I could wrap my head around, okay, visioning, figuring out what we want these corridors or these neighborhoods to look like. Here's some standards to implement that. So far, so good. The third bullet point, how much of this 3 years is because of that third bullet point? Ballpark.
I'm going to go to the schedule to help answer your question too. And what we're doing is really waiting for a consultant to help us identify what they think an appropriate timeline is. This is what staff think a fairly reasonable estimate might be. If they think they can get it done faster, we are all ears. So I'll just start by saying that. Typically, your outreach process is going to be up to 6 months so that you can effectively, engage stakeholders in the community and get really good feedback. The actual process of writing the zoning code amendments will probably be one of the faster parts once we kind of know what we need to include. And then really CEQA is where your timeline starts to get slower. It is not uncommon for an EIR to last between 12 and 18 months plus. It is just a long process. I have tried to get it down in many different instances on different projects, and it is difficult to do. There's, mandatory timelines for public review, to go, get input, and then actually just to conduct the environmental review. So that's really, you see that being 12 months here, so I think that's ambitious. So, I'm just showing that to you here because it's a possibility that those zoning code amendments could be faster, but the CEQA could be longer, so it's kind of a guess at this point till we get a proposal back.
Right. Okay, slide 11. And this is, what you said earlier made me think about this, the next RENA cycle that's coming, and who knows, it's a big mystery what it's going to be. How much through this process are we setting ourselves up so next time around it's not just a giant, time and budget and headache for everybody, so that we could just, all this work we put into, the visioning and coming up with new standards and just clicking it up rather than a whole repeat of what we've been doing the last few years.
I'm really glad you said that because when I say comprehensive, that's really what I mean. Mixed-use zoning districts is one option. It could be a really good option to help set us up for future RENA cycles. So when we get a new RENA allocation, we're just looking at densities, we're looking at heights to accommodate it, maybe some potential zoning standards. And then that rezone, zoning code updates is more like a 6-month process instead of a 3-year process.
All right, last question. This is a quick one. Slide 13, we have in the program, it looks like it's under cleanup, the third green bar, which makes me think it's an in-house work rather than what the consultant's doing, but residential parking, that has 2 years worth of blue squares. And I'm wondering if we're waiting for something else to happen before we just do that.
Yeah, we're waiting for the rezone program. We have already conducted a study and we have recommendations for multifamily residential parking. But we want to make sure that they are, appropriate and consistent with our rezone program, that they still make sense for the larger types of projects we're going to see as part of rezoning.
Is that going to only apply to the rezoned parcels?
We're not totally sure yet. So we may do some adjustments to that study. It's something that we've discussed internally and that we want to review with the consultant so we can get some good recommendations and ideas. Like, should we, do we need to look at other types of residential parking? What are the potential impacts? So it's definitely on the list of consideration.
Okay. Those are all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Toller. Commissioner Andrade, Commissioner Rojas, any thoughts? Commissioner Andrade.
Yeah, can you bring it down for us a notch and tell us what does RENA stand for and really what's its goal?
Sorry, I had it on a slide, so I was going to pull that up. It stands for Regional Housing Needs Assessment. In this particular cycle, the state has taken a little bit different of an approach in determining what the RENA allocation should be for each jurisdiction. And it's based on a variety of factors: proximity to schools, proximity to retail, proximity to high quality transportation. So they really tried to break down like other factors than they had historically used, like population and more simplified factors, to determine how much housing should be part of each jurisdiction's RENA. That went through like a very long methodology process, and I very much anticipate the next RENA cycle will probably follow the same with maybe a little bit more added or different methodologies. But that is really the state saying, this is your regional share of the housing that you need to plan for, that you need to try to encourage, and our due diligence is to create programs that really achieve that within the planning period, so that we continue to make progress towards housing production.
Housing production and also increasing types of housing and affordability,
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
Housing and overcoming patterns of segregation based on the community and what is the general community's kind of average wages, right? And I wanted to emphasize on that housing that is affordable, as opposed to, just affordable housing, which nowadays is like starting rate at $850,000 is not really housing that is affordable. So with that in mind and understanding what the goal of RENA is on slide 10, or excuse me, 7, I think it would be really helpful just for us to have a very kind of clear understanding of it, of maybe breaking out that the percentages of the total allocation. So for example, as you can see, half of the progress that we're listing there is in the above moderate income. So maybe if we can just put like another column that actually demonstrates the percentage, because the majority of it is in the above moderate income. I think that would just be helpful to give us all kind of a really quick visual to see where we're actually at as far as housing that is affordable. Would be really helpful.
Is it all, Commissioner Andrade? All right, thank you. Thanks for your question. Commissioner Rojas, thoughts? All right, we asked all your questions? Yeah. All right, Ms. Miguel, thank you so much. Unless anyone else wants to jump in for a second bite. Thank you so much for the presentation, really appreciate it. We'll go ahead and move on to public comments that are not listed on tonight's agenda. So if anyone in chambers wishes to speak, you're welcome to come to either podium. You'll have 3 minutes. At the 1 minute mark, you'll hear a little chime, and at the end of the 3 minutes, the microphone will cut off. It's not me taking it out personally on you. It'll just cut off at the end. So we'll start to my right. Ma'am, we'll start with you. Welcome.
Good evening, planners. My name is Shirley McDaniels. 2 weeks ago, the Jamboree Housing Corporation project was going to be on the agenda, and that was canceled 2 weeks ago. So it was supposed to have been brought forward to tonight, but it's not on the agenda. So either it's already been approved or it's still in consideration. Does anybody know? And the Jamboree Housing Corporation, is that done, or is it still in consideration? Because I went to several city council meetings. I've been before planning several times in probably, March, April. I don't know when this project first came up as a idea, or they had approached the city about building on the senior citizen parking lot. And so I don't know, I don't hear any. I noticed one of the screens showed the building of the project and said Jamboree Housing Project. So I go, oh, what, did I miss something? Has it already been approved? No, we don't know, huh?
We're up here just to listen to your comments. Ma'am.
Oh, okay, all right, then I'll go for it then, okay. I never thought we would revisit this project, but here we are, okay. I spoke previously on this project, so I'm reiterating. Everyone is aware that we need affordable housing in Costa Mesa, but it must be the right location. The parking lot of the senior center in Costa Mesa is the wrong location. Parking on the west side of Costa Mesa is at a premium. The senior parking lot meets others' needs. Lot full at the DMV, park at the senior center and cross over. Plummer Street residents sometimes need to use our lot. Our parking lot is not underutilized, as one news article stated. There are 6 signals from Placentia to the bank on West 19th Street. Navigating West 19th Street gets a little tricky because there's lots of ins and outs. Lastly, I'm sure it would be up to engineering, but I don't know if 19th Street's infrastructure can even handle a project of that size now on West 19th Street. But thank you for listening.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Humphrey, welcome.
Good evening, Commission. Jay Humphrey, Costa Mesa resident. I'm going to talk about a slippery slope. You guys just did it here tonight with your presentation. Presentations are just that. They are information items, and I understand that this is already given to the City Council. This is a repeat of that for your information. And presentations as an information source allow for questions because you may need clarification of what the presentation said, but not input. Input from elected officials or appointed officials who are making policy decisions should be a matter of public intercourse also. So by having a presentation which does not allow for public comment for that presentation, we've just stepped on a slippery slope. Because now what we've done is we've reduced the amount of public support, public comment on a given item. And an item that you had enough information that you asked multiple questions and made multiple comments about. And that should have been available to the public to also make, even though it'd be more information than everybody wanted, quite honestly, the reality is that what that did is shifted an item that should have been in the agenda allowing public comment as opposed to a presentation. And those are the kind of things that are helping to remove the public from participating with their government. And I have real concerns about that. I don't think anybody intended that to be the case. That's why it's a slippery slope. Because everybody's going to say, no, we didn't intend that. And I don't think anybody did. But if we start doing that, sooner or later we have the next step that council starts giving presentations of information and actually vote on some item on it. I'm concerned about that. Somewhere along the line, we need to address it in front so that the public is always able to communicate and talk with their elected and appointed representatives so they know between themselves what all the information is. Thank you very much for your time.
All right, thank you, sir. Anyone else in chambers wish to speak on an item not listed on tonight's agenda? All right, seeing none, well, Anna, do we have anyone on Zoom or telephone?
No, we do not, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you. Go ahead and close public comments and move on to Planning Commissioner comments and suggestions. Starting to my right, Commissioner Rojas, any thoughts? Thank you. Commissioner Andrade?
None for tonight, but for the madam that just came up and spoke about the senior center housing program, I'm sure there's staff that's available here that can help kind of clarify what the goals of that project are and kind of some of the logistics included, right? Their parking is not going to go away. Parking is still going to be created so that the center still has the parking that it needs, and the housing that's going to hopefully go there also has the necessary parking, just so that you're informed. But we really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your comments.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Andrade. Commissioner Martinez.
Yeah. First, I guess for the presentation we just heard, I only asked questions, so now I want to give some comments about what I just heard, and I was hoping to hear some public comments about that too. I mentioned that I had attended the city council meeting where this was first presented, and I did give public comment then as well. And essentially the gist of my comment is we need to hurry up pretty please. This is taking way longer than I would hope. And I think the feedback that the city council gave and that I am giving now is that this is urgent. We're in a housing crisis, and I want to see us move as fast as we can to solve that crisis. So I'm just hoping that whatever consultant is selected for the rezone process, that they move with that urgency. And I'm thinking of the various delays that we have felt. For example, the senior housing project was supposed to be scheduled for last meeting, and now it's scheduled for sometime in December for us. Fairview Developmental Center, I received a briefing about that project in September, is what this presentation said, and that's also been delayed. And I understand delays happen, but it's just unfortunate, and I really do wish that we could move faster. So those are my comments on the presentation. On my regular comments, Circuit is a new microtransit service that is being offered by the city of Costa Mesa for residents or whoever happens to be in the majority of the west side and East 17th Street. So you can travel between any 2 points within their service area for free at no cost. This program will go on for 3 years. So I encourage anyone who lives in the west side or close enough to East 17th Street to use it. It's a great program. I've already used it twice. Yeah. And secondly, happy Native American Heritage Month. I just wanted to recognize that fact, and that we are on the lands of the Tongva and Akjachaman peoples near the former villages of Ganga and Lupuk. The only site in Costa Mesa that is on the National Register of Historic Places is the so-called Fairview Indian Site, so I felt it important to recognize the heritage of the peoples who were here before. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Martinez. Vice Chair Toller.
I don't have any comments tonight.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll just say briefly, happy belated Veterans Day. I'm very happy to come from a military family, my grandfather and my dad included. My grandfather in World War II, my dad in Vietnam. And I just wanted to thank anyone out in the crowd and at home for your service to this country. So thank you very much. That's about it for me. We'll go ahead and take a 5-minute break before we jump into the consent calendar. So we'll see you back here in about 5 minutes. Thank you. Welcome back to the Planning Commission meeting of Tuesday, November 12th, 2024. Call the meeting back into order after a short recess. We'll go ahead and move on to the consent calendar. I see that we have 3 consent calendar items tonight. As a matter of form, all matters listed under the consent calendar are considered to be routine and will be acted upon in one motion. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless a member of the Planning Commission, staff, or the public requests specific items to be discussed and/or removed from the consent calendar for discussion. Items removed from the consent calendar will be discussed and voted upon immediately following Planning Commission action on the remainder of the consent calendar. And Anna, if you'd please read the title for these consent calendar items, please.
Consent calendar item number 1, general plan conformity report and resolution for the proposed acquisition of real property located at 778 Shalimar Drive, assessor's parcel number 424-051-23. Consent calendar item number 2, general plan conformity report and resolution for the proposed abandonment of an utility easement encumbering the property located at 2016 Wallace Avenue, portion of assessor's parcel number 422-252-18. Consent calendar item number 3, general plan conformity report and resolution for the proposed abandonment of a strip of unimproved public right-of-way located adjacent to the property at 174 East 19th Street.
Thank you so much, Anna. I know that someone from the public pulled consent calendar item number 1. Is that correct? All right, perfect. Thank you. I'll go ahead and kick it over to Director Drapkin to just briefly make comment on this item. And if you would, Director Drapkin.
Sure, I can provide a short summary for the first consent calendar item. It's this item is for a state-required determination of the Planning Commission to make a finding that the city purchase of the residential property located next to the Shalimar Park is consistent with the general plan. Just as a background, the state has required local cities to obtain this determination for general plan conformance for many years. And the state determination is required for both either a purchase or acquisition or an abandonment or a sale of property of a public property, that is. The subject request is for the Planning Commission to determine if the use of the property that's proposed to be purchased to expand the Shalimar Park and or to use it for property for other community amenities, such as a local community center or an area that provides for social recreation programming, is consistent with the general plan. So the city is also considering other ancillary uses that might occur at that site as well, as indicated in the report. Staff has reviewed the purchase potential from the perspective of the general plan and believes that the proposed acquisition is consistent with the general plan and general plan policies. Specifically, the proposed area of the potential park expansion is located in a neighborhood that has a park population ratio of approximately half of the city's goal to provide 4.26 acres of parkland to population of 1,000 residents. And also that the opportunity to expand and establish neighborhood park to provide for more community services, staff believes results in an overall greater public benefit. In addition, staff recognizes that the existing residential units are in poor shape and that the city will make great efforts to ensure that the 3 existing tenants that are occupied will be relocated appropriately. And therefore, staff is recommending that the Planning Commission make the general plan conformance determination for the property at 778 Shalimar Drive to be acquired by the city for potential park expansion and other ancillary community benefits and amenities, and in an area of the city that is considered more densely populated than other parts of the city. And going forward, the Planning Commission determination will be forwarded to the City Council for the direction, to the city manager for the acquisition of the property. If the property is ultimately determined to be acquired and used as a park, or other ancillary park purposes, then the use of the property would be returned to the Planning Commission to consider if the conditional use permit findings can be made.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Director Dropkin. That was a great overview, very succinct. We'll go ahead and open up the meeting for public comment. If you wish to speak to this item, you're welcome to have 3 minutes, and the same thing holds true. You'll have 3 minutes to make a comment. At the 1 minute mark, you hear the chime, and then at the end of the microphone will just cut off. And we'll start to my right. Yes, sir. Welcome.
Good evening, Planning Commissioners. My name is Eric Jimenez, and I've been living on the west side for over 25 years, specifically in front of Shalimar on 18th and Wallace. As a co-founder of Bright Youth, a community-based organization currently focused on serving the Shalimar community, I recognize and am in full support of the city's decision to acquire the apartment building adjacent to Shalimar Park. However, we are concerned that demolishing it for the sole purpose of park expansion would create challenges in an already competitive and tight housing market. We'd like to suggest an alternative to completely demolishing the property in consideration of our push for more community involvement. A secure and long-term community center on the bottom floor of the building where community leaders and parents can congregate would be an ideal alternative to an open public space. This way, residents can enjoy not only a brand new renovated park coming soon, but a center where access to city resources, a meeting area, books, and technology can be easily accessible. As for the top floor of the building, we'd like to suggest maintaining these residential units at an affordable income-based monthly rate. And for those living on the bottom floor currently who will have to relocate, we ask the city to help with making their relocation as smooth as possible by offering any vacant surrounding rental units within the neighborhood for those families. We appreciate your cooperation in helping the Shalimar community thrive, and we thank you for your consideration and for your time.
All right. Thank you, sir. Mr. Humphrey.
Good evening again, Jay Humphrey, Costa Mesa resident. This is another slippery slope. You guys, in essence, by your action tonight, are going to pave the way for the city to go ahead and buy the piece of property if they want to. Please rest assured, I'm all for adding parkland into the city. I'm not sure this is the best use of it, and apparently staff isn't either, because they say they can't commit to it being a park. They don't say what's going to be done, and they say that it's going to possibly, well, will take away, if you buy the property and tear it down and make a park out of it, you'll reduce the housing in that part of the town and also affordable housing. So that shouldn't be on the consent calendar. That's why it's a slippery slope. It's not that I have a disagreement with the item itself as much as where it should be, because now in the consent calendar, as we all know, you handle the whole thing as one vote typically to make sure that it's smooth and it's everyday stuff that has to happen. But this is a step to, in fact, have the council be able to make the next step and have the city make the next step. It should, in fact, be a public item that is in the agenda specifically as either new business, old business, depending on where it falls, or public comment, so that it is noted that it doesn't get caught up with a pile that, like on council, sometimes you have 17 or 18 consent calendar items. Well, that's a big pile for people to think about. It's more important to call these things out when they're very specific, especially when they're financial. So that was my basic goal in this, was to say, look, it's again the slippery slope. And the problem is you guys also become, if it happens and works here, then sometimes it shows up in council. And I would like to see it stop here so that, in fact, it will stop there also. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Mr. Humphrey. Anyone else in chambers wish to speak to this item? All right, seeing none. Anna, do we have anyone on telephone or Zoom?
Cynthia McDonald, you may provide your public comment.
Welcome, Ms. McDonald.
Good evening, Commissioners. Cynthia McDonald, Costa Mesa resident. I agree with Jay. This should not have been on the consent calendar. In theory, I support adding park space to Shalimar Park, particularly if it means putting in restrooms and other necessities. However, I note that the commission has only been asked to determine that the proposal aligns with the goals, policies, and objectives of the open space and recreation element of the city's general plan. What you have not been asked, and should have been, is to determine whether it is consistent with the housing element, which is also part of the general plan. I don't know why that was omitted, because the acquisition and demolition of housing will cause a net loss of what is likely affordable housing, albeit small. It's still a net loss, and it will cause displacement of existing residents with no replacement units identified. This is clearly inconsistent with the general plan's housing element goal HOU 1.2. That goal is to, quote, minimize the displacement risk for existing residents when considering approval of future redevelopment and public projects. End quote. I ask that you consider that. Also, as a taxpaying member of the public, I would like to know the size of the units, including the number of bedrooms, the number of tenants, and the demographics. Are they seniors? Are they part of a disadvantaged community? What I'm curious about is compliance with 2016's SB 1000. Rents, are these affordable units? Relocation fees, the city will pay the tenants, if any. Approximate cost to buy and demolish property, and how the city intends to fund the purchase and the construction of the park. And while all these items may not be of immediate concern to the commission, they're definitely of concern to the public, and transparency is needed. And it needs to be fleshed out. Before I go, Mr. Martinez had a question about the HCD's enforcement procedures and actions with respect to non-compliant cities. The HCD has an excellent video on this subject, which can be found on their YouTube channel. If I remember, I'll send it to you, but you might want to follow that agency on YouTube. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McDonald. Anyone else on Zoom or telephone?
No, there's not, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you, Anna. We'll go ahead and close public comments. And I'll kick it over to my colleagues to ask questions of staff on this item if you have any. Mr. Martinez?
Yeah, okay, so first I'm going to start with the very technical. I was looking at the site plan and the parcel map, and I wanted to ask about the parcel that is actually in between Shalimar Park and the subject site, which would be 424-051-22. It's about 2 feet wide, and it runs the length of the property. So I wanted to ask, is that also being considered for purchase for the future? Is that already owned by the city? What is going on with that parcel?
That parcel is a utility easement, and it creates some type of a utility access for a property owner. It is not part of the request.
Okay, so my question is just if this in the future, subject to et cetera, like all the future requests, if the site that we're considering today becomes city-owned and a park, is it okay that it's not fully contiguous?
Yes, it's not a problem. There may or may not be issues with considering development over it. However, that would be discovered as we go through the process. For this project, it is only for determining general plan conformance. Any further development of the site will obviously be considered by the council with direction to the PC for another review of the project.
Okay. Yeah, since what we're being asked is kind of specific, I have very broad questions, but I don't think those are for us to discuss. So I will leave that over to the council. But I will just ask, are we being, because I read the resolution and I see that there's very specific mentions of purchasing it for the purpose of, and then says potentially expanding the size of the existing Shalimar Park. And then whereas a proposed expansion of proposed acquisition for use as potential expansion of the park and various general plan policies. So with this language in the resolution in mind, are we actually being asked about, like, should this be a park right now because of the language in the resolution? Or is this also just like very potential?
Yeah, good question, Commissioner Martinez. The request right before you right now is just to make a determination if purchasing the property for park purposes or other public amenities, like, for instance, some of the things that the public speaker spoke about as a community center or other programming might be applicable there. It is sort of a concept because nothing's been done at this time, but certainly the city council hasn't made this decision. But what the request is, as required by the state, is the planning commission provide insight with regards to general plan conformance with regards to purpose, location, and extent specifically. So if you go to the report, you'll see where the staff report analyzes purpose, location, and extent, and tries to focus very specifically on what the state requirements are for those 3 separate general plan consistency findings.
Yeah, okay. That's it for questions, but I'll have comments.
Okay. And I'll just weigh in for a sec, Commissioner Martinez, in saying that some of this language in the resolution, when it generally says things like may or could, or something that's a little less resolute, I interpret that as kind of boilerplate indemnification type speak, just to kind of keep the city on the right side of the resolution. It doesn't pigeonhole us into a certain position, especially so early. That's just generally how I interpret these. But thanks for asking the question. Anyone else? Commissioner Rojas.
So I'm going to ask the same question in a different manner because I'm still trying to figure this one out myself. I was a little bit confused by it. I appreciate the public's comments on this because the real question I'm having on mind is, what are we being asked to do? What is the purpose or point of this? Is this a 2-stage process? Planning Commission says, okay, we're good with it. We're going to allow for City Commission to move forward on it. But there's a lot of, as you just said, Adam, there's not mays and shalls. There's no legal language committing us to anything. We're just kind of saying, we're good with it. We're going to go ahead and move forward. But we're not being very specific on what our intent is. So is this part of something that somebody above our pay grade or above our, our dais here has decided we're gonna slot this, or we just want to kind of set the ground for something we're going to do later on down the road? Because that's what it rings like to me. But obviously there's questions in the public and questions in my mind as I was reading it, over the weekend, of what exactly we're being asked for specifically. I know it's a vague question, but it's a kind of a vague resolution, so I kind of want to narrow that down a little bit.
Yeah, I understand this isn't a normal request that's in front of the Planning Commission, so to speak. You are absolutely on the spot with it with regards to the start of a process. It is the beginning of a requirement that's state law, basically, for the Planning Commission to make a determination of general plan conformance. And it's really related to specifically the potential acquisition of the property. Nothing else is being considered at this time with regards to the development, other than the possibility that it'll be developed in a way to make a general plan consistency determination with relation to the purchase specifically. So in this case, the project includes, like I said, the purchase and acquisition. That's a city council obvious endeavor. However, post city council review of this and direction, it will come back to the Planning Commission. If it does ultimately become a park requires a conditional use permit in this zone, and the Planning Commission will have to make regular findings for that. But that is all dependent on if the city council believes that the project should move forward, it should be purchased, and it should be developed in a way that will improve park or other amenities in the area and that are needed.
Excellent. Actually, I appreciate that because it just clarified the point that I was thinking of. This is obviously part one. Part two being we're going to develop it or have a discussion about it, then it comes back to us at a later date to approve what's actually going to be done, as opposed to just writing a blank check and saying we're just going to go ahead and develop it to be something without putting a period on the end of that. So I just wanted to make sure that that was clear for public record because it wasn't 100% clear at the beginning of the meeting, and I appreciate your answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Rojas. Anyone else? Hey, Commissioner Andrade.
Yeah, I appreciate the community to come out and review this item a little further, pulling it out for greater discussion. And really great to hear from Mr. Jimenez and your organization. I mean, that's exactly what this opportunity or this project really needs is let's go to that local community and see what are their interests, what is it that they specifically need instead of making a general plan for it. But I appreciate the city keeping the purchase open-ended for us to dive into and reach out to the community and local leaders there that are plugged into the needs of the community to best decide what to do with this really great opportunity that the city has taken to invest in a much-needed area. So really appreciate those efforts and investing in the Shalimar community.
All right, I really enjoyed this topic. I think this is a super interesting thing. Whoever platted this out several decades ago kind of made a mistake, right? We forgot to provide for some open space. We just sold off all the lots. Now we have park poor neighborhoods. I appreciate that staff put in this map, even though it kind of goes against the argument. It's outside of what we've deemed in our general plan as park poor neighborhoods, even though it might also qualify as underserved. So I have, like I said, this is super interesting. How do we claw back some open space and land that's been developed? But as everybody said, we have a very narrow task here. So in terms of whether we can make the finding that this acquisition would be consistent with the general plan, I think that staff did a great job. Location, purpose, and extent in the staff report, there's nothing to argue with there. I cracked open the general plan open space and recreation element and the first objective. It's also in the staff report on page 5. 1A, maintain and preserve existing parks and strive to provide additional parks, public spaces, and recreation facilities that meet the community's evolving need. You jump down to policy 1.4, prioritize acquisition in underserved areas. So clearly it meets the intent. In terms of, I like the idea of the community, some sort of community center with units above. I think if we saw what that would cost the city, all our eyes would pop out of our heads and we would squirm. But I hope you keep bringing that up to everybody. I hope you show up to city council, and I'm glad you came tonight because they might watch this meeting and it'll get them thinking about it before. Regarding displacement, that's totally a fair question. Three people or 3 units are going to be potentially vacated, and I'm interested in all the mechanics of that, but that's not the point of tonight's meeting. Whether that kind of serves as is a point of inconsistency with this acquisition, because we're seeing if this acquisition is consistent with the general plan, you say, okay, the housing element, there's some friction there. But rhetorically, I would ask, okay, under what circumstances could we ever demolish a housing unit to get some parkland back? And I don't think that could be answered easily. So I think overanalyzing everything is going to be a lot of work. But since we're building 11,711, what is it?
760.
Thank you. A ton of units over the next, how many, where are we? Next 5 years, and a half of those are going to be restricted. I think we could say we're safe, but it is still fair to think about and considering when this goes before council. So that's all.
Okay, thank you, Vice Chair. Seeing as how we're still in staff question mode, I'll go ahead and ask mine. we've been kind of circling around this question of what happens to the potentially displaced residents should this property move forward for acquisition. Is there a program in place to deal with that?
Yes, the easy answer is there absolutely is a program in place. We're working with as a consultant to start a program for the tenants and relocation. There's state laws involved. There's all kinds of requirements for replacement potentially and tenant relocations that staff is currently considering and in the middle of. But obviously at that level, it'll be more of a council review.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Director Dropkin. I have no more questions, so we'll go ahead and close our public comment here. I'll go ahead and make a motion at this point to find that the Planning Commission General Plan Conformance Reporting is not subject to CEQA under CEQA Guidelines Sections 15061B3 and 15301I2, and adopt a resolution that reports on general plan conformance for the proposed city acquisition of real property at 778 Shalimar Drive for expansion of the adjacent existing Shalimar Park. Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Toller. So I'll go ahead and say that the way I interpret this item is I think staff did a great job at fleshing this out. Our goal here is not to determine what the use is, but to at least make a determination that this is an acceptable use given our general plan. I think staff referenced some very good general plan goals and objectives and policies as seen in the open space and recreational element goals, like OSR 1, OSR 1A, OSR 1.8, OSR 1.18, among others, to make this justification more likely than not. I'll also go back to what one of the callers said in terms of the housing policies in that she mentioned minimizing displacement, not eliminating it. In this particular case, Costa Mesa has a backstop to help facilitate the relocation of people who may be displaced because of a potential acquisition like this. So I am not personally or professionally worried about that. I do believe that everyone will get their fair shake should this move forward. I think overall, in how I interpret the policies of this community, I can recognize very easily, even without seeing the maps that staff provided us, that we are deficient of a lot of park space in West Side. Park space seemed to be an afterthought at some point during the planning process back in the early 60s, seeing as how this particular segment of the community was built in 1961. That now we're having to deal with those poor planning approaches now because parks weren't baked in back then. So to me, I think that this is overall a very exciting opportunity, particularly for Shalimar and for the West Side, to gain some space potentially, and that everything that staff wrote is in conformance with our general plan. Those are my thoughts. Vice Chair?
I agree with everything you said, and I guess I got ahead of myself before the hearing was closed. So everybody already heard what I think. So obviously in agreement. I will say, just to plant a seed, this is always tricky. Like the chair said, this was kind of an oversight. This was kind of a mistake in the 60s. Now it's now it's expensive, but it wouldn't have been back then. And so we have this, man, are we just going to get one lot worth of space for millions of dollars? So that's a tough pill to swallow. That's hard. And I'm wondering of ways to have our cake and eat it too. And transfer of development rights is a planning tool. I floated this idea back when we started talking about the housing element like 4 years ago. Didn't get much traction. It'd be a weird thing for us to do, but if we could sell the rights of that property owner to build 3 units or whatever he's allowed to somebody else, if somebody else foots the bill and we get the open space, just a thought. So I agree with the motion.
All right, thank you, Vice Chair. Does anyone else wish to speak to this motion? Yeah, Commissioner Martinez.
Yeah, first I want to ask just one question out of curiosity. So I think the reason why we're saying like potential expansion, like the potential word is there, is because this requires a CUP in order to be a park. So if this was in a zone that allowed for a park by right, would we be in this dilemma of potential expansion?
Yeah, it would still be a conceptual review because the council has not made a decision at this point.
Gotcha. Okay. So the first comment I want to make is just a fun fact about the site. It currently has 4 units, and in the R3 zoning district, there's a requirement that the maximum density is 1 unit per 2,178 square feet, and that would mean that this lot has a maximum unit count per our zoning code of 3.2 units. So it's actually legal non-conforming. So I don't get why our zoning is that low, that it wouldn't even require what is currently there. But that is an issue for another time. For this project specifically, first I am reminded that the design plans for this park were already approved by the city council, and they did have an option of expanding the park footprint into the street, and that was not an option that was selected. So now I have to wonder if, like I know there's a big difference of going into the street versus the next parcel, but it's still expanding the park, and it's still an option that previously wasn't chosen. But I think it's sufficiently different for me to be okay with it. I also wonder whether we should be looking at the other potential uses as part of this resolution. So I would be interested in a friendly amendment to add to the resolution, whereas the proposed acquisition of the property for use as a potential community center, and then related goals that can be found in the general plan. Whereas the proposed acquisition of the property for use as potential public housing, and then list out the the multiple goals in our housing element and our land use plan related to opportunities for housing and for affordable housing. I would like to see that, and then it further broadens the resolution so that we're not saying, just for use as potential expansion of the park, but also for this wide variety of things that the city council can then decide and have a menu of options to. So I want to ask if you're open to that.
I see where you're going with that, Commissioner Martinez. I'm going to say no, only on the grounds that it is outside of our purview to backload this and kind of preempt these uses, because the decision before us is not what we want to be there. Is this use conforming to the general plan? Now, I think on the other hand, what we can do is have the record read your thoughts on this, and that City Council will take those into consideration when they consider moving forward on this or not. But as far as what on its face, this seems to be the decision that's before us, not those other things.
I mean, those other things would also be applicable, I think, if there are certain general plan policies that support it. I unfortunately didn't have the chance to open up the general plan for specifically community centers, but for more public housing, we had a public commenter mention a specific policy that would support that use. So I don't think it's outside of our scope, but I see where you're coming from.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from too, Commissioner Martinez. I think it's out of an abundance of caution to not backload this with a bunch of additional possibilities, when really what we're reading is just what's right in front of us. I'm sure that by the time this reaches City Council, they'll be well aware of the options that are in front of them, and that should they choose to move forward with a final design that's in line with those sentiments, they'll have read about it in the record from everything that we've been commenting on today. Just a sec, I see Director Dropkin put on his mic.
Yeah, I wanted to mention that the zone does allow for housing, so it's not a problematic to go forward with a housing project at some point at that location. It's zoned and intended for that by right. So that shouldn't be a real issue down the line, so to speak, even though at this point the acquisition was for some other purpose.
Yeah, and I think that Director Dropkin said it much more eloquently than I did, which is the base zoning for this allows for a lot of different uses, and to me it kind of sounds like calling water wet when you're trying to add up all these things that are kind of redundant anyways. It's already baked in. So if City Council wants to move forward with a different plan other than what's in front of us, we've at least made the determination that for this particular use, it's correct, it conforms. And that's just my humble opinion on this. So to answer your question, Commissioner Martinez, I don't think I'll be adding the friendly amendment, just on those grounds. Anyone else wish to speak to the item? Commissioner Andrade?
Yeah, similarly to Commissioner Martinez's comments, I think it would be really helpful for council just to be cognizant that, I mean, we're hearing directly from community leaders of that area that grew up there, live there, see the day in and day out, and their direct feedback is we need a community center and affordable housing because we're displacing folks that live there. So I think I think maybe just if we can't make this amendment here for the process that needs to be followed, just really want to echo those comments that it's really essential to, because it almost seems so interesting. We're trying to build green space to provide for underserved community by removing housing, the one need, when we literally just spoke, we had a presentation on the city on how we're trying to do our best to create additional housing. So to eliminate housing for a park doesn't seem like the most helpful for this community, right, that is struggling in the city as a whole. So I think as long as we can make it very clear for City Council when they listen to this to get that direct community feedback, to make sure that it's brought in and we really hear what the community needs, which we heard, from one speaker today, Mr. Jimenez, which I'm sure once we go to City Council, hopefully, Mr. Jimenez, you bring the crew out to come out and speak directly what does that community needs. I know I've been to volunteer activities in that area, so I know that the community is so engaged. So this is your call to action to the community. Come out and make sure that it's very clear to our leaders that what we need here beyond a park. Parks are great. We're all for it, but definitely just tuning in to what the community needs would be great.
Sure. Thank you, Commissioner Andrade. And I'll go ahead and double down in saying that I have a deep appreciation for what you just shared and what Commissioner Martinez shared previously, in saying that I think it's the city's intention, at least the way that I interpret it on the policy side, to stay open to what the community need is. Now, I don't think there's ever 100% agreement on anything that we ever do, but for at least our intentions, it has always been our intention for as long as I've been involved formally to engage with the community, get that buy-in, get the feedback, keep it into an iterative process to where those kind of conversations stay alive up until the point that it's time to make a decision. And that's what I've seen on the municipal side and what staff have done, and largely what City Council have done as well along the way. I'll also double down in saying that I hope that the record reflects a lot of these sentiments as well, so that City Council is well aware of these requests from Planning Commission, so that they're aware of what these options are outside of specifically park as well. So that's my hope as well. Commissioner Rojas, thoughts?
Good.
No? Okay. Vice Chair, do you want to circle back at all after that conversation? No? Okay. All right. There's nothing left to say. Let's go ahead and call the question. Anna?
That motion carries 5-0.
All right, thank you. And that was, I'll say in hindsight, that was a stimulating conversation. I really, really enjoyed it. I think we just leveled up all of a sudden. We'll go ahead and move on to the balance of the consent calendar. Does anyone have any thoughts on the balance before we come to a motion? All right, seeing none. I don't think anyone from the public polled. Would anyone like to make a motion on the balance? Motion made by Martinez. What's the motion?
Move the balance.
Okay, is there a second? Seconded by Vice Chair. Any comment?
No.
All right, comment? No. All right, let's go ahead and call the question.
That motion carries 5-0.
All right, thank you, Anna. Wow, let's go ahead and stretch our legs for 5 minutes, shall we? All right, we'll see you back in 5 minutes. Thank you. Welcome back to the Planning Commission meeting of November 12th, 2024. Now call the meeting back into order. And Anna, if you would please read the title for public hearing item number 1.
Public hearing item number 1, conditional use permit PCUP-24-0012 to operate an animal hospital / veterinary service use with ancillary non-commercial animal kenneling, priceless pets at 1520 Ponderosa Street. Please note, we have received public comments on this item that have been provided to the commission and made a part of the record. This is a call for any ex parte communications.
Thank you, Anna. I'll go ahead and start to my right. Commissioner Rojas.
I have none.
All right. Vice Chair.
None.
Commissioner Martinez.
None.
I have no ex parte to report on this item, other than one instance. It was just before we came back from the break. I exchanged a couple words with Mr. Humphrey about this item, just hearing his perspective on it, but there was no real substantive communication on the details of it. Commissioner Andrade, any ex parte to communicate on this particular item for priceless? Okay. All right. Thank you. I'll now turn it over to Mr. Raimondo to present the item. Mr. Raimondo, welcome.
Thank you, Chairman, and good evening, Commissioners. My name is Jeffrey Raimondo, Assistant Planner with the Economic and Development Services Department. And the item before you tonight is a conditional use permit application for a veterinary clinic called Priceless Pets. The proposal is for a new veterinary clinic in which will operate 7 days a week from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. and will be occupying the existing commercial building on the site. The clinic will also have ancillary non-commercial kenneling, and other improvements would involve restriping the parking lot. The subject property is 1520 Ponderosa Street, which the site you can see boxed in blue is located on the north end of Ponderosa Street and is the second lot west of Harbor Boulevard. The site is zone C1, which is the local business district. And within vicinity of the site are auto-related businesses to the north and the east. Across Ponderosa Street to the south is a cannabis dispensary known as Mr. Nice Guy. And to the west are existing residential developments consisting primarily of triplexes and fourplexes. The existing site contains an existing commercial building with parking areas to the front and rear of the building. The site will be restriped to provide 4 parking spaces to the front of the building and 23 parking spaces at the rear of the building, resulting in a total of 27 parking spaces for the site. There is also existing landscaping along a portion of the front parking area that will remain. At the rear parking lot area, there will be a 900 square foot outdoor play area consisting of artificial turf, which I have highlighted in yellow on the aerial views that you see on this slide. To mitigate potential impact to the residential development to the west, the play area has been positioned on the opposite end of the property. The play area will also be utilized during business hours. However, the area will be limited to a maximum of 2 animals at a time. Expanding on the operations of business, Priceless Pets will provide veterinary services primarily for dogs and cats, and also for small animals such as guinea pigs and rabbits. The business will consist of 3 to 4 employees, and as seen on the floor plan, the business will primarily have a veterinary clinic area near the front entry of the building. Furthermore, there will be open areas designated for a pet nursery, an isolation area, and a storage area. Now, the city currently has a contract with Priceless Pets that requires the business to allow for general intake from the city's animal control officers, in addition to providing standard veterinary care. So set aside at the back right corner of the floor plan will be for animal kenneling, which will be available for use by the city's animal control officers. For the site, no animal boarding services will be made available to the public. As shown in the previous slide, an outdoor play area will be provided at the rear of the building for the animals, in which the applicant has indicated that animal waste will be disposed utilizing wet vacuuming and using a chemical cleaner to maintain the space. Now, prior to today's meeting, staff has provided public notices by mail on site and also in the Daily Pilot newspaper. Only one public comment was received, which was from the business manager of Globe Tires, which is the business located east of the subject property, who was in support of the proposal. The proposed veterinary clinic with ancillary non-commercial kenneling as conditions will be compatible with the surrounding residents and commercial businesses and would not be materially detrimental to other properties within the area. The establishment of the veterinary clinic to occupy the entire building would benefit the community as an addition to the city's animal care facility options. With that said, staff recommends that the Planning Commission adopt a resolution to find that the project is categorically exempt from CEQA and to approve conditional use permit 24-0012, subject to conditions of approval. This concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. And the architect, Ryan Oldham, and the business owner, Lisa Price, are also in attendance to answer any questions this evening. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mr. Raimondo. I appreciate the presentation. Colleagues, questions for staff? Commissioner Martinez.
Yes. So first, for the outside entrance, is there a path from the sidewalk to the entrance of the building?
So currently, with the proposed plans, there's no separate walkway or like pathway that leads to the entrance other than just going through the parking lot.
Okay. Hopefully that can be fixed. Let's see. The staff report says overall animal capacity is expected to be a maximum of 50 animals. Is that veterinary and kennel included? Is it like both combined, or is it like just the kennel?
I would assume it would be for the both the services, but that's something I'll have to defer to the applicant to clarify.
Okay. Yeah, so the back right corner we say is for animal control. And I'm wondering, is that like, are we saying literally only animal control can use this area and these kennels that are in this area? Is that a condition we have? Or is it just ebb and flow of how business goes that they might decide animal control might use one that's in what's labeled dog kennel area, or maybe Priceless Pets will use some in the animal control area? Or do we specifically require that this is only for animal control, like exclusively?
So Commissioner Martinez, the Priceless Pets and the city of Costa Mesa have a separate contract for the, if you will, the kenneling that occurs as part of the animal control function. And as part of that contract, it specifies that there will be a certain minimum number of kennels that will be reserved and set aside for exclusive use by the animal control officers. That's what's designated in that upper right-hand corner shown on the plans.
Okay. I guess then my question is, if they're only using that area, because that's what we've contracted, does animal control not deal with cats? Because it's only dog kennels that's in the floor plan.
No, the kennels would be for whatever animals the animal control officers bring into the facility. I think the contract specifies that it could be animals of a domestic nature, if you will. Obviously, certainly if they run into, if they were to pick up, let's say, for example, if there was a coyote that was just, clipped by a car in the public street or something and collected by the animal control officer, that's not necessarily an animal that would be taken here for that purpose. But if there are cats, if there are dogs, which are most likely to be found, or if there happen to be some chickens or animals of that nature, then those could be brought to this facility to be cared for on a temporary basis.
Okay, those are my questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Martinez. Anyone else? No? I think I may have one, possibly two questions. For staff, I guess I'm trying to understand that the adoption part of Priceless Pets is separate from the medical arm of Priceless Pets. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And with this location, they're not proposing any adoption services. It's just strictly veterinary services and then the animal control kenneling service.
Yeah, and I thought so, Mr. Raimondo. I guess I'm trying to just overall understand what the connection is between these two separate contracts and what the mechanisms are to migrate from one to the other. What is the mechanism to go from actually catching the animal, treating the animal, and then surrendering the animal for adoption? What that looks like. Because I mean, I can assume that the two entities are one and the same, just under two separate contracts. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, that's something I would have to defer to the applicant to clarify for you.
Okay. All right. I appreciate that. Colleagues, any questions? All right. Seeing none. Mr. Raimondo, thank you so much. We'll go ahead and move things along. I will now open the public hearing and ask the applicant or the applicant's representative to come forward to either podium. And if you would, please let us know three things. Your name. Let us know if you've read the conditions of approval. And number three, if you have, do you agree to them? So I'll hand it over to you.
Good evening. My name is Lisa Price. I'm the Executive Director for Priceless Pets. I have read the conditional use permits conditions of approval, and I do agree to them.
All right, that's great. Welcome, Ms. Price. And if you'd like to make a brief presentation to the commission, you're welcome.
I wanted to say thank you so much for taking the time to look at our proposal here tonight. And overall, I wanted to say thank you to the entire community of Costa Mesa. The fact that you guys care so much about animals is very near and dear to our hearts. And we just want to say thank you for the opportunity to even serve this particular community in this particular capacity. This proposal will allow for the community to also receive services, not just animal control, but also services to the community. So one of the things that we want to do, and also under our contract, but just as an organization as a whole, we want to be able to serve the community that cannot afford sometimes vet care, as well as making sure that all the animals are spayed and neutered at a lower cost or at a rate that your community can afford. So that's basically what this particular facility will be able to offer, not only fulfill our term of the contract, but also the community at large. So our adoption center, which is located at 1536 Newport Boulevard, that will remain intact, and that will be where the adoptions take place.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Ms. Price. Colleagues, any questions for the applicant? Ms. Price, I don't know if you knew this or not. My dog is from Priceless Pets.
Oh, amazing. Yay.
Yay. I know.
Thank you for adopting.
This is him.
Aw,
Okay.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Yeah. But aside from that, thank you for your presentation. I'm sure we'll be calling you back up again once we move along a little bit more here.
Sure, no problem.
All right. We'll now open the floor for public comments. If you'd like to speak to this item, you're welcome to come to either podium. You'll have 3 minutes. The 1 minute mark, you'll hear the chime, and then at the end of 3 minutes, it'll just turn off. So we'll start with you, sir. Welcome.
Thank you, Commissioners. I'm Ryan Oldham, the architect for Priceless Pets, and I do actually have one item from the conditions of approval that's just kind of a technical thing that I just want to get in there. The very last item says to provide a plans and approval from Orange County Health. I would like to get a little bit more specific on that, if we could, in the conditions of approval, because I'm not completely sure that Orange County Health provides plan check and approval to plans for this type of use. So I just maybe ask staff to be a little more specific in that item.
You're talking about the absolute last under special
Yes,
district requirements, where it reads, provide a plan to the County of Orange Health Department for review and approval.
Correct.
Do you know if this is a common request when opening up this kind of use, that you would coordinate with the county health agency?
Well, we've done one other use, and it was not a request in that. And then I know county health, I don't know exactly what they plan check in this use, just dealing with them. I mean, we know they deal with food service and they deal with other stuff. But in terms of an actual plan check and approval, I'm not quite certain on that. So I just wanted, it may be that they do. I just want a little bit that written a little bit more specific.
And if you'd remind me, sir, just what kind of specificity would you be looking for here?
Well, county health would be very vague. So is it environmental health permit for hazardous waste or something that would be a little bit more specific to the use and function of this facility?
I would imagine that the health department would be the one to know the suite of requirements for
yes,
for this particular use. So they would.
Yeah, I just don't want to get into a position where they tell me, oh, we don't do plan check for that. And then I come back to the city and the city says, well, it's part of our conditions. And then I get into a odd back and forth.
Okay. Mr. Rodriguez, yeah.
If I might, it is kind of a standard condition of approval that we have, but I agree with Mr. Oldham that more specificity would be helpful. I'm not at a place where I can recommend that specificity. What I would prefer to see is just the clause added at the beginning to say, if required, comma, then a plan will be submitted to the County of Orange. That at least provides some opportunity for staff to reach out to the various divisions at the county to confirm whether or not this use triggers any of their requirements. And if their answer back to staff is no, then the condition will be fulfilled.
That it would read as such: if required, provide a plan to the County of Orange Health Department for review and approval.
Correct.
Okay.
Then that would be great.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. I think we're still in public comments, aren't we? Okay. We still have 3 minutes. Yes, ma'am. Welcome.
My name is Becca Walls. I am the Vice Chair of the Animal Services Committee as appointed by the City Council of Costa Mesa. I am one of 2 that have been on that committee since it was enacted in January of 2018. I just want to express my support for this conditional use permit. This has been something that we've been working on for 7 years to have a sheltering service in the city of Costa Mesa. And in this case, the provider is Priceless Pets, and so just want to show my support for this. It's been something with animal control and with the city staff, both in the police department as well as previously in Parks and Rec, that we've desired and been working on, and kind of the point of our committee. So I just really hope that you guys are able to pass this conditional use permit tonight. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Anyone else in chambers wish to speak to this item? All right. Seeing none. Anna, do we have anyone on Zoom or telephone?
No, we do not, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Thank you. Go ahead and close the public comment portion of the public hearing, and I'll turn to my colleagues and ask if you have any further questions for the applicant at this time. Commissioner Martinez.
Yeah, the plans, I was just counting, the literal plans have like 17 spaces for the kennels. And I was wondering how are they stacked too high, or is it just one?
It would be a mixture of both. So there will be provided, anywhere from, 5 to 10, 5 by 10s, as well as for the smaller animals that would be smaller kennels which then would stack on top of one another. And to answer your question in regards to the cats, obviously the cats are in the other area, so there is a designated area for the quote-unquote holding for animal services, or for the animal control component of it, and those particular cats would be not held with the dogs, just to make clarification on that.
Okay. And then the 50 animal cap, is that both kenneling and veterinary?
Yes, we don't typically, unless there's some specific reason why the animal needs to stay overnight, but we don't typically kennel for veterinarians. And also for the public animals, we wouldn't anticipate, unless it would be under the veterinarian reasoning, we don't anticipate holding a ton of animals overnight for any reason.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Martinez. Anyone else? All right, seeing none. All right, Ms. Price, do you have any closing comments as we move things along?
No, I feel like it's been a long time coming, so I really am excited to be able to get this project up and over with, and hopefully it will be a shelter that everyone can be proud of, and I would love to be able to offer you guys to come out once it's finished, so you guys can see, you know, the staple that will be in the community. So thank you again for tonight. Thanks for all of the opportunity to speak and your consideration for the conditional use. Appreciate it.
Great, thank you so much. Commissioners, do you have any further questions for staff?
Yeah.
Yep, Commissioner Martinez.
About the comment, the special district requirements number 2. I never actually thought to ask, what is the relationship about the code requirements and the special district requirements that we list? Is this just information for the applicant, or is this actually something that we require as part of our approval?
So we do include these notes in the resolution for different special district requirements as applicable. One of the things we did review and clarify that medical waste is a requirement for review for both humans and animals. So in this situation, more than likely, there'll be some types of county health review requirement from them for the medical waste component of the project scope.
Yes, and I'm just wondering, like, are these special district requirements also required by us as the city to complete?
We work as a team, more or less, and we will reach out to the special districts. We wish, for instance, Mesa Water is something that we work with regularly, and the waste management, that's usually one of them. We'll probably more than likely be reaching out for waste management on this one as well. So just with regards to any kind of refuge or other kind of things that we don't know are normal or not typical, like what they're proposing.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you, Commissioner. Anyone else? All right, seeing none. Go ahead and close the public hearing, and I'll go ahead and make a motion. Find that the project is categorically exempt from the provisions of the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA per CEQA Guidelines, Section 15301, Class 1 existing facilities, and approve conditional use permit PCUP-24-0012 based on findings of fact and subject to conditions of approval, with the additional modification to add the language if required at the beginning of the special district requirement subpoint 2 under Health Department, such that it reads, if required, provide a plan to the County of Orange Health Department for review and approval. Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Martinez. I'll go ahead and say that this is a, thank you for seconding. I'll go ahead and say that this is a very exciting project. I am a personal and professional supporter of Priceless Pets, so much so that I got my dog Willie Nelson from, from Priceless Pets. He wasn't named Willie Nelson, I renamed him. His name was Ringo before. But I think that the service that Priceless Pets provides on the adoption side can't be overstated enough. You know, personally and also as a member of this community, I know that it's brought a lot of joy and a lot of hope to be in a part of a city where we have a no-kill shelter, where the staff and the volunteers, many volunteers who work at Priceless Pets, are doing everything they can to provide a high-quality life for animals, because I think it, you know, a city that treats animals well is a city that I think has a much higher ability of treating everything well. How we treat animals says a lot about who we are as a people, and I believe that very strongly. So in expanding this operation to include everything that's proposed here in this project, I think is rather exciting. I think Priceless Pets has already proven their worth time and time again to this community. So I'm enthusiastically supportive of this project. Commissioner Martinez.
Yes. Sorry, I have to go through my normal process issues with applications. First, we've had a vet before, but I want to point out again, I just think it's funny that both human and animal medical uses have the same parking requirement. That's just funny to me. And then also the fact that with this application and the last veterinary application, I think every comment was positive, and there were no issues. So I again have to question why this has to go through a CUP, and especially the fact that this is a city-funded veterinary service, essentially, in kenneling. So it's interesting that we all have to keep going through these processes. But at least it's looking like it'll be approved tonight, so that's good. And then I'll just add at the end, I would like for staff during plan check, hopefully a bike rack can be included. And hey, it's a veterinary service, so let's have a fun-shaped bike rack like a dog or a cat. That's always fun. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Martinez. Anyone else wish to speak to the item or the motion? All right, seeing none, Anna, let's go ahead and call the question.
That motion carries 5-0.
All right, thank you, Anna. That decision is final unless appealed to the City Council within 7 days. Good luck. Thank you. We'll move on to old business, new business. There is neither old business or new business, so we'll move on to departmental reports, starting with Mr. Yang.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No reports from the Public Works Department.
Okay.
Back to the chair.
All right, thank you. Director Dropkin, Development Services.
No reports tonight, Chair.
All right, City Attorney, Mr. Porter.
No report.
All right, thank you, Mr. Porter. Thank you for joining us this evening. We'll now adjourn. Thank you.